immediately start building cabinets, knowing how to work all the equipment, knowing how to build rocking chairs, so I'd lose a finger, right? I wouldn't go into a plumber's office and say, I got the muse coming on, I'm ready to rebuild a French drain, right? So, we don't, and you know, even outside of anything that are crafts, we don't apply that notion of first time is only time, or pure inspiration is what comes from it, or whatever you want to call it. But we don't set aside the notion of practice as being part of that process in science or the mathematics. So, you know, to me, we don't apply that to anything else but writing. And it's so, in that light, it's utterly silly to think of it that way. And I'm not saying that we do this. You know, often as we get to these higher levels of thinking, we get into deeper conversations about writing, that starts to go away, and we start to understand that it is a process of revision, like Maya talked about. That's practice. That's learning how to do it. It's like any other art form. You know, if I miss practicing one day, I can tell. 2 days, the critics can tell. 3 days, everyone can tell. What discipline there is to that, and to me, not a drop of inspiration, really. I mean, that doesn't sound like an inspiring thing. On the side that you love to play your instrument, yes, that is inspiring. Still, we'd be utter fools to say that there's nothing inspirational or magical about a piece by Bach, or about the Sistine Chapel, or about a poem by Blake, or a story by Carver. So we know that the flash of inspiration is in there. So I'm not saying that it's not part of the process at all, because it definitely is. But I'm just trying to emphasize the act of practice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do to practice, just very briefly, and you can take what you want or don't want from this. Well, first of all, I do things that take that intimidation factor away. I do things to make the stakes seem lower. I work bit by bit. This gets me over the fear of that one-time limited offer. There's a one-shot deal where I write a word and the cursor blinks for half an hour. It's like, what is the next word? Well, just write a word. Just write a word down. And doing, you know, this concept of changing that concept from one of like throwing a single dart for a bullseye into something organic, into something that's more, it's kind of like a cycle that spins into the perpetuity of everything that you'll write in your life, right? It spans, it allows you to kind of step back and say, I might not get this right the first time, but the sun comes up, the sun goes down, the sun comes up, the sun goes down, and it's this rhythm that you get into. And it's a lovely rhythm when you get into it, because the stakes are really low. And then, that's when the inspiration can flash. That's when the visionary, that's when the muse likes to come in, like Jason Whitmore said. You know, that's when the rational mind it's been placated. Now, creativity can come in, right? So I do that. Another thing I always do, I always want to finish what I start. Henry Miller was a big proponent of this. Like, if I start something, I finish it, even if it ends poorly. And this is another part of the practice, is even if I know that this story is never going to see publication, it's a complete clunker, it's not any good at all, I finish what I start. And that prevents the terrible events that can unfold when you start one thing and then have 4 other things that you keep starting. Oh, I've got a great idea, and then you go off to that and go off to that. And I remember a line from a Bob Dylan song: "There's no success like failure, but failure is no success at all." Right. So each of those failures is a success, but, right, like Maya said, we are working toward making things better every time that we practice, every time that we revise, or anything like that. But on the subject of perfection, and this is one of 2 things that are all important to me. First of all, the realization that perfection is an ideal. And like any ideal, its realization in the material world is by nature impossible, right? So you should strive to make good work. I would say I strive to make good work, right? But allowing yourself to be liberated from that notion of perfection, you know, a utopia of, you know, utopias are always suspect, right? This isn't an argument against idealism at all, but it is an argument for liberating yourself from that constraint, from that pressure. To just say that's, you know, it's not even a thing that I can achieve. Yeats, like Maya said, edited his poems all his life, right? So I think he understood that perfection, he was constantly seeking perfection, but knowing that it's not going to be caught. A very, I don't know, kind of a Zen-like thing, but anyway. So that's one of the two things I think is most important. The second thing that I think is most important is just to write every day. These observation logs that we've been using are key in writing every day, and just to do it. And my example that I'm going to show for you today is by reading the story that is not, it's not finished to the point that I'm comfortable with it. And I'm going to share it to you. It's imperfect. And you know, one thing I try to do is to go through those. I do exactly what Maya said through Anne Lamott, is to have that updraft, or to have the downdraft where you just get stuff down. Then you have the updraft where you're cleaning it up, and then you have the dental draft where you're checking every tooth right. And what I don't use on the downdraft is a thesaurus, but what I always use on the updraft is a thesaurus. I hide this away from myself on the downdraft, and I put in simple words, and there's lots of reallys and verys in there that I know will change into different adverbs at some point. But then when that updraft comes in, I use the Synonym Finder by J.I. Rodale. This is the best thesaurus that I've found. It's better than Roget's thesaurus or anything like that. It just has more words. And what I'm looking for is not the most complicated word ever. It's the right word, right? The right word that fits syntactically, that fits rhythmically, that expresses what I want to say. So I don't know. It may seem simple, but that's a huge part of the process for me. And then, yeah, like I say, the most important part is just getting the writing out. So anyway, I'm just going to read. I'm afraid that I'm not going to have time, but if after this story I do, I will. The Guardian just published this two-part series called 10 Rules for Writing Fiction, where they asked a few score of fiction writers to give their 10 rules for what should be done whenever you're writing fiction. They probably a couple of days ago, maybe the day before yesterday. If I don't get time to it, you should go look at the Guardian website and look at some of these. They're great, but maybe after this story, I can squeeze some of them in because I really wanted to share them with you. So anyway, so about this story, I'm going to read it here. Yeah, Zach Fulton from who's the prose editor at Bricolage asked me to submit something there very kindly, like a month and a half ago, which is an intolerably short amount of time for me to write a short story. A month and a half is like, my brain just works way too slowly to do that. And he said the only stipulation of it is the theme has to be modern day ruins, whatever modern day ruin means to you. So I've been kicking around this idea of this, I'm from Oklahoma, like Matt said, and I write a lot about Oklahoma. My thesis is a collection of stories that take place in Oklahoma. And I've been wanting to write for a long time about this town that actually exists, which was once a lead mining town. And I mean, it provided, I think it's something like 85% of the American-British ordnance during World War I and World War II. The lead that went into all the ammunition came from this, like, I mean, it's like a 40 square mile piece of land at the corner, in Oklahoma, at the corner of Kansas and Missouri. It's wild. And so, of course, this town got really rich. It was one of the many boom towns in Oklahoma. Other boom towns got rich off of oil. They got rich off of lead and zinc. And then they mined everything out, and it went bust. And it really went bust. And they had miles of, well, I'll tell more about it in the story, what this town is like. So I've fictionalized the town a little bit, but most of the details I've left the same. Now it's a super fun site. It was so bad that the Bush administration, who were not necessarily the most active in environmental causes, went in and bought everyone out in the town.